Mr. Speaker.
I call Claire Curran.
Mr. Speaker, I'd please take a call on the third reading of this bill. And I think it's important to take us back to where this bill came from and the intent that supposedly lay behind it, and whether or not that intent has been fulfilled. And I'd like to draw the House's attention to the Law Commission's report which was undertaken, I think, from around 2006, 2007 till 2011 on privacy and the enormous issues underlying it and the need for reform. And I would just like to draw attention to some of the benefits and risks that were drawn out in that report that was ultimately provided to the Minister, which said, and specifically around information sharing, that information sharing has obvious benefits, that individuals are relieved of the need to supply the same information to several agencies, that the agencies can work together to see and understand the individual's problems in their whole context, instead of each agency seeing only through its own narrowly focused lens. It also said in that advice that, however, that the risks of sharing can be considerable and need to be carefully managed. There are significant implications for individual privacy. Sharing, in fact, runs counter to two fundamental principles of the Privacy Act: that personal information should only be collected from the individual concerned, and that information collected for one purpose should not be used for another. Moreover, if information is inaccurate, the error will appear in multiple databases, making it more difficult to correct, and it may be difficult for individuals to find out exactly where their information is held so that they can take steps to ensure that it's corrected, and that some of the information shared can be particularly sensitive. Failures of security, the use of inaccurate information, and the use of information in ways which are not anticipated by the individual can lead to loss of trust in the government. When the Law Commission made its report to the Minister, it said, "We are of the view that reform is required. Our aim is to identify a way to facilitate appropriate public sector information sharing within a framework of openness, transparency and accountability, which accords appropriate weight to privacy values." Mr. Speaker, that report contained 136 recommendations, 136 recommendations, some of them extremely important recommendations. They included giving the Privacy Commissioner a binding power of decision on complaints about people's rights to access their own information, because anybody who knows, who has made a complaint, knows that it's very difficult, takes a long time, and in the end, the Commissioner herself does not have the power of decision. The other thing that it recommended was that people should be notified when their personal information held by an agency was lost or otherwise compromised, for example, through computer hacking, if the breach is sufficiently serious. There is nothing in this bill today on either of those two seriously important and very current issues. Instead, what we saw was two recommendations of the Law Commission taken up. 136 recommendations were made, 2 have been taken up. And the concern is, what will happen to the rest of them? Will they languish? Mr. Speaker, it is so important when discussing this piece of legislation before the House today, which is about to be passed, that the question is asked of the Minister, what will happen to the rest of those recommendations? In her first reading speech, the Minister said quite clearly that the government will respond in due course. Well, this bill was first read in the House sometime last year, and we're now at the third reading, and there has been no report back to the House on how the Minister plans to treat the rest of these recommendations. That is a critically important point. Mr. Speaker, another important point to make in this third reading is how the cherry picking that has been undertaken around these few recommendations that have been brought in this bill to the House, how they have chosen to deal with that Law Commission report. The concern is that they may do the same, and it appears they will do the same, with another report by the Law Commission around the reforms that are required and needed to the Official Information Act. And that is another point that I want to make extremely seriously to the House today, that cherry picking from a serious piece of work undertaken by the Law Commission to pick out just a few things that suit the government of the day is just simply not good enough by a government that's supposedly serious about openness and transparency and accountability and about building public trust. Because that is what this piece of legislation before us today on privacy and information sharing is ultimately about. It's about bringing up to date an act which needed to be brought up to date, but it's about seriously reforming the practices of government agencies, about how information is shared, and about how the rights to privacy of individual citizens are treated in this country. And unfortunately, the opportunity to undertake a seriously important piece of reform has been dropped and lost. And we have to ask, well, what is going to happen in the future? With the Official Information Act reform, we have equal concerns about how that may be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, these issues are current. They're absolutely current and they're absolutely important. We're seeing thousands of breaches of people's privacy every day, particularly through electronic means. We are not seeing in this piece of legislation a comprehensive or any kind of measures to address that and to take that seriously and to ensure that the underlying reasons for why those breaches, data breaches are occurring and why so many people's information is being shared in ways that is inappropriate and damaging and deeply distressing to them is happening. And and we've heard example after example after example with the Ministry of Social Development through Work and Income and those breaches, that information that was made available through the hacking into the kiosks, through ACC, through IRD, through immigration, and through countless other agencies and departments across our land. It's absolutely critical that the people of New Zealand who currently do not feel assured that their data is secure can be reassured that this government takes it seriously. There is a bill, a private member's bill, before this House which calls for a special inquiry into these breaches. Given the lack of this bill to address this issue, despite the fact that it could have, that there was the opportunity to do it, given that lack and given the ongoing seriousness of this issue, Mr. Speaker, I hope that this House will treat that bill with the seriousness that it deserves. Thank you.
I call Tim McInboe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm also pleased to take